Part 49. The Prince is Very Fierce. Author, Gong Zi. Chapter 481. At night. After Su Buling visited Su Danking, he took Song Yafu to relax by the Huihe River. He did not return to the back house until dark. After hearing Man Zi say that Zhongli Jiju was back, he came to the courtyard where Zhongli Jiju lived. Zhongli Jiju was not used to being served by maids, so she lived alone in the courtyard. The cold wind blew the lanterns in the corridor. The courtyard was very quiet. There were lights on the windows of the room, reflecting the woman's profile. A little sparrow squatted on it. On the beams under the eaves, half-closed eyes were shivering with cold. Su Buling walked into the courtyard with gentle steps, took out a handful of shelled pine nuts, and placed them on the stone table in the courtyard. The little sparrow has no name, but Su Buling named it Yi in his spare time, which means 9 shallow and 1 deep. Of course, this meaning did not dare to be told to Zhongli Jiju. The little sparrow had been carefully raised by Zhongli Jiju for many years. It was extremely smart. After giving Su Buling a glance, it flapped its small wings and landed silently on the snow on the stone table, still staring at Su Buling. Su Buling took out some more pine nuts, then nodded his little head to eat them with satisfaction. After Su Buling secured the sentry post, he walked softly to the window and took a look through the gap in the window. Zhongli Jiju was sitting sideways in front of a small table in a nightgown. It was cold in winter and she was not too exposed. The loose skirt covered her graceful figure, but the hem of the skirt was pulled up, revealing 2 leather leg rings above the knees. Looking from the side, she is still wearing safety pants. The obscene trousers in this world are relatively long, similar to autumn trousers. Zhongli Jiju must have cut them herself. They are very short and resemble a hip-covering skirt. The tulle fabric is close to the skin, and the every detail is drawn to perfection. As the saying goes, a gentleman does not bully the darkroom. Su Buling's eyes did not stop and moved to the small case. There were a bunch of bottles and cans on the table, as well as medicine pounding jars, copper scales and other tools. However, looking at Zhongli Jiju's sneer-like expression, he was definitely not preparing gold sore medicine. I'm afraid he heard that Su Danking was here. Preparing gifts for the reception. Su Buling shook his head, raised his hand and knocked lightly on the door. Miss Jiju. In the room, Zhongli Jiju, who was preparing the tickling with a half-step, was startled when he heard the sound and almost spilled the medicine powder on himself. She secretly complained that the little sparrow went to bed after eating and didn't care about anything. She got up and straightened her skirt, found a shawl to put on her body, and opened the door. Seeing Su Buling standing in front of the door, Zhongli Jiju's eyes were a little complicated. She saw her apprentice Chu Chu a little confused a few days ago, and as an elder, she originally wanted to take the opportunity to bring Chu Chu and Su Buling together. But after learning that Su Buling and Ningyu were sleeping together, this plan was naturally abandoned, and he pulled Chu Chu back and said a few words to Chu Chu. Chu Chu probably didn't like Su Buling yet, but she was unconvinced by Su Buling's cold attitude. Apart from being a little embarrassed, she didn't take it to heart at all, and returned to normal by the afternoon. However, Zhongli Jiju was obviously in a difficult situation at this time. If he continued to fight with Ningyu, he would have to involve himself. If he didn't fight with Ningyu, he would be squeezed by Ningyu for the rest of his life. After all, she couldn't find him. A man who is more handsome than Su Buling, has great martial arts skills, has a high position, and is extremely talented. He is still a little dissatisfied with being suppressed by Ningyu for so many years. Zhongli Jiju likes to fight for his own reputation when he is alive, but he is not so mad that he doesn't care about anything. He keeps himself clean and self-sufficient, and will never give himself to a man he doesn't like for a little vanity, but he just wants to. There's nothing annoying about it. Zhongli Jiju was thinking a lot, but still felt that he should stabilize the situation first and wait until he figured it out later. A bit of a smile appeared at the moment. "Mr. Su, why are you here? Can't you get up and ask for medicine?" "Can't get up." Su Buling tilted his head slightly, a little surprised. Zhongli Jiju didn't think there was anything wrong with this joke, so she opened the door to the room and said, "I am a doctor, and I don't want to be treated when I am sick. Since you have given me wages, I will naturally help you solve the problem this month. If you don't talk about it, I won't. Even if you want some medicine to make it more interesting, sister, I can prepare it for you." Seeing that Zhongli Jiju had returned to normal, Su Buling felt a little relieved and chuckled. "Miss Jiju is joking, I don't have any use for those items. I just came here to explain what happened during the day." Entering the house, Zhongli Jiju did not close the door. The two sat across from each other in front of the small case. She continued to play with her bottles and jars, and said softly, "Chu Chu has been alone since she was a child, and I haven't taught her much about worldliness. The reason for dancing today is not because I admire Mr. Su. I just want to make friends with you. Don't take it to heart." Su Buling felt a little relieved when he saw that Jiju had no misunderstanding. He raised his hand to pick up a small bottle on the table, looked at it casually for a few times, and then said, "Miss Jiju is preparing itching powder for Su Danking." Zhongli Jiju Feng Qingyun's expression froze. After thinking for a while, he snorted lightly. "What? You want to take care of this?" Back then, he personally promised to paint for me, and even asked me to go to Chang'an City to buy wine. But in the end, he traveled thousands of miles back and forth without even saying a word. He didn't even give an explanation, especially is it that saying, "No matter how hard it is to draw a beautiful woman in the world, it's obvious that I'm not good enough and I can't even retaliate." Su Buling shook his head. "Su Danking also has difficulties. If I really painted you back then, have you ever thought about what you would do?" Zhongli Jiju frowned slightly. She had been worried about not becoming the 8 chiefs of the Central Plains since she was a teenager. She really had not thought about what she would do after the success, but the matter was obviously not settled. "What's mine is mine. No matter how worthless it is, I can't let others ruin it. If it's not mine, I won't rob it. No matter why I want to be the 8th leader, I have this condition," and Su Danking agreed again, "then I should be the one who decides whether to take it or not, right? He can't blame me for his backtracking." Su Buling had nothing to say about this explanation, and thought for a while, "It is right to fight for what you deserve. If Miss Jiju is really unable to let go, how about I talk to Su Danking and ask him to give it to you now? Paint a picture." When Zhongli Jiju heard this, there was no look of joy on his cheeks. He shook his head and said, "You are too old. It's pointless to fight with a little girl. It's useless not to talk about it. Instead, you will be criticized by idlers." He said this, she raised her eyes and glanced at Su Buling strangely. "Su Buletinling, why are you so nice to me?" Su Buling spread his hands, "I treat everyone like this. Su Danking is Yu Fu's elder after all. I just come here to make peace with him." Zhongli Jiju looked at Su Buling carefully and nodded slightly. "It's okay, you, the financial backer, are here to be the lobbyists. I'll spare Su Danking for now." Su Buling felt a little relieved after hearing this. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 482. After Su Danking came to Xiajiazhuang as a guest, as a famous scholar of the time, he was warmly entertained by the Xiao family. Even Xiao Qi showed up and exchanged pleasantries with him. After the inquiry, the young ladies of the Xiao family became excited and secretly dressed up, trying to attract Su Danking's attention and become the new 8th prize after Xiao Xiang'er. After Ningyu he returned home, he still didn't dare to contact the girls, and meditated alone in the yard. Hearing that Su Danking came to Xiajiazhuang, because he had been taken care of by Su Danking when he was fleeing in the rivers and lakes before, he naturally had to visit him. Seeing that it was still early and Su Buling had not come, he left the house alone and came to the small courtyard where Su Danking was staying. Su Danking had just arrived, and many members of the Xiao family came to visit him. Even several great scholars and celebrities in Huainan City came to greet him after hearing the news. Ning Yuhi waited until it was getting dark and the guests had left before coming to the door and bowing. "Mr. Su, long time no see." Su Danking was as easygoing as ever, brought the teapot, and chuckled. "Sit down." Ning Yuhi sat down beside the tea table, pondered for a moment, and said softly, "Last time in Chang'an City, the Queen Mother and Madame Lu were there, and I didn't thank Mr. Su, and then I didn't have the chance, which was really a bit rude. Back then, I was wandering around, thanks to Mr. Su's plea to the current emperor, otherwise, I don't know what would happen to me now." Back then, Ning Yuhi was hunted down by the Tang and Kui families, and hid from place to place under the protection of Jia Yi, a loyal soldier of Queen Kui. If Su Danking hadn't written a letter to plead for me, she would probably have died in some desolate mountain. Su Danking just shook his head and poured a cup of tea for Ning Yuhi. "I shouldn't have painted you back then. I thought you were the legitimate daughter of the Tang family and the Tang family would protect you. But I never thought that Tang Xiao, a sycophant, was so cruel. Alas, it's my fault. If there wasn't that painting, you would have traveled around the world and become a swordsman. How could you have ended up living alone in a small Taoist temple? Good and bad things go hand in hand. It's meaningless to talk about the right and wrong of an action afterwards." Ning Yuhi naturally didn't blame Su Danking for painting. If the Kui family hadn't interfered, she would have become the queen of Dayu. Although it was not voluntary, at least there was no harm. It can only be said that fate is playing tricks on people. When talking about the Tang family, Ning Yuhi's face was a little lonely, shaking her head and sighing. "Tang Jiao is obsessed with pleasing the court. He is a scum in the world. It's not surprising that he did what he did back then. I treated him as a relative back then. If I see him again, I will never let him go easily. Unfortunately, I can't beat him." Ning Yuhi is a concubine of the Tang family. Because of her good foundation, she was found by the Tang family to pretend to be a legitimate daughter, intending to seek the position of the mother of a country. After the Kui family secretly designed to fail, Tang Jiao thought Ning Yuhi had escaped from marriage, and killed her mother who pleaded for her without saying anything. This hatred can be said to be irreconcilable. But Tang Jiao is one of the 10 martial champions after all. No matter how weak he is still the tail of the phoenix. It is not something that ordinary people can kill at will. Ning Yuhi and Su Buling's current relationship naturally allows her to ask her man to help her avenge her blood feud, but Ning Yuhi will analyze the situation. The Tang family is now well treated by the court, and Su Buling has a very tense relationship with the court. If Su Buling takes action against the Tang family, it will undoubtedly cause the resentment of the current emperor, and even bring unpredictable consequences. The revenge is hers, and Ning Yuhi doesn't want to make Su Buling embarrassed, so she has not spoken up. She doesn't know when this revenge can be avenged. Seeing Ning Yuhi's depressed expression, Su Danking said softly, "I have been walking around in the martial arts world these days, but I heard that the sword Saint Zulu left for Yuzhu a few days ago. If it goes as expected, he will definitely destroy the Tang family." Ning Yuhi was stunned and looked at Su Danking with a slightly puzzled look. She knew that Sword Saint Zulu and the Tang family had a feud of exterminating the whole family, and that he would destroy the Tang family to avenge his hatred sooner or later. However, since Zulu appeared, he seemed to be helping the Eagle Tower. Su Buling said that he had appeared in Hangzhou a few days ago. How could he suddenly go to Yuzhu? I haven't heard Linger mention it. Ning Yuhi thought for a while and asked, "Are you serious?" The news Su Danking said was of course true. He traveled a long distance to Zhaijiazhuang, not just to visit his niece. After Su Buling's proposal to the Xiao family was over, he would return to Suzhou on a chosen day, but under the current situation, Su Buling could not just leave. The old man asked Su Danking to bring this news here, in order to give Su Buling a reason to go to Yuzhou. The news is absolutely true. Zulu left a few days ago. I don't know when he will arrive at the Tang family. This. Ning Yuhi's expression changed a little, and she pursed her lips lightly, with a slightly complicated look in her eyes. The revenge for the murder of the mother must be avenged personally. Even if it is impossible to avenge it personally, you should be there to watch the enemy die. Waiting here for good news from Zulu is obviously a bit inactive. Besides, Zulu is notoriously cruel to his enemies. He always fights back. Several small forces that participated in the encirclement and suppression of the Zhu family were wiped out. Even the Cao family that failed to lend a hand was found. If he went to the culprit Tang family, I am afraid that hundreds of people from top to bottom would not be left alive. Ning Yuhi has changed her surname and is a stranger to the Tang family, but she grew up in the Tang family when she was young. There are always a few elders and concubine brothers and sisters with whom she has a good relationship. They must not be killed by Zulu. Thinking of this, Ning Yuhi stood up and said goodbye to Su Danking, and then walked out of the yard quickly. It was dark and the lights were on. Ning Yuhi returned to the house and wanted to discuss it with Su Buling, but as long as this matter was told, Su Buling would definitely go to Yuzhou with her. Su Buling had already agreed to the Xiao family's marriage, and the boat was ready. Ning Yuhi didn't want to delay Su Buling's wedding, and Zulu went to take revenge. She just went over to take a look to prevent any harm to innocent people. Zulu knew that there is no danger in the relationship with Su Buling. Ning Yuhi thought about it for a while, and without disturbing Su Buling, he came to the back house, called out Ning Qingyi who was chatting, and said softly, "Qingyi, you go to the room to get your things. Let's go to Yuzhou and tell Manzi. We'll say hello to Ling tomorrow and ask them to leave first by boat. We'll follow." Ning Qingyi was a little confused, but she had trusted her master since she was a child, so she didn't say anything more. She went back to say hello, then took the sword from the house. The master and the apprentice led the horse and left Zhaijiazhuang in a low profile. There was a lamp like a bean in the courtyard, and men and women sat opposite each other in front of the case, chatting about all kinds of trivial things. Seeing that it was getting late and it was time to rest, Zhongli Jiju obviously had no intention of not staying the night in the room, and Su Buling didn't hang around either. After saying good night, he left the yard. "We made an appointment during the day to have sex with master, so naturally we couldn't break the appointment." After Su Buling washed up a little, he sneaked outside the room where Manzi and his master lived together, and listened carefully, but there was only one sound of breathing in the room. Su Buling stood outside the room and hesitated for a moment, thinking that Ning Yuhi was already ready and waiting. After searching around his study and bedroom, but still couldn't find anyone, he returned to Manzi's room. There was nothing going on in the house at night. The girls all went to bed early. Manzi was lying alone on the quilt, making a big font, with a few smiles on his round face, and he looked very sweet as he slept. Su Buling walked over and looked at it for a few times, then raised his hand to reach into the quilt and rubbed the bulge on the quilt twice. It was a big soft ball, warm and comfortable. The cold hand stimulated the whole branch, and he said hum in his sleep. He raised his hand and hid it in a daze. "Daning, aren't you leaving? What are you doing?" Su Buling was stunned for a moment, then squeezed slightly to wake up Xiao Manzi. Zhu Manzi opened his eyes sleepily and saw Su Buling. His face turned red. He hurriedly covered his face with the quilt and said in a muffled voice, "Mr. Su, what are you doing? It's so late at night." "No, no, I'm still young." "You're already so old, but you're still small. Su Buling pulled back the quilt and said softly, Manzi, where is the master? Zhu Manzi has woken up, his eyes are embarrassed, and he is slightly shrinking his neck. Daning and Xiaoning are going to Yuzhu, let's go by boat first, and we will catch up in a few days. Su Buling frowned slightly, why didn't you tell me earlier? Xiaoning asked me to tell you tomorrow. How long have you been gone? It's been quite some time. Su Buling stood up, thought about it for a while, and thought of Su Danking, who suddenly came to the door with unknown intentions, and felt something was wrong in his heart. It was probably what Su Danking said that made Ningyu rush to Yuzhu overnight. The reason why he was so anxious was probably only the Tang family's business. After Su Buling let Manzi continue to rest, he quickly walked out of the door and came to Su Danking's yard. He took a glance and saw that Su Danking had disappeared silently, and even the Xiao family members around him had disappeared. I'm afraid he ran away immediately after delivering the message for fear of being beaten. Su Buling was immediately annoyed and wanted to curse a few words, but after all, he was Grandpa Fubao. In the end, he could only flick his sleeves and turn around to the Xiao family's ancestral home. Xiao Qi has a workaholic temperament and sleeps very late every day, with the lights still on in the study. Seeing Su Buling coming in from the window at night, Xiao Qi put down the file. Apparently she had something wrong. She frowned slightly and said seriously, Su Buletinling, don't be so arrogant in the study. It will be dirty and hard to clean up later. Su Buling came to the desk and shook his head, Kikai, that old master in Yuelu Mountain probably wants me to go to Yuzhu, and has already lured Master and Ning Qingyi away. I'm afraid he left in such a hurry for the sake of the Tang family. There is a blood feud. The Tang family has the support of the imperial court and cannot be underestimated. I am not worried and have to go there. Xiao Qi was not surprised by the news. The two had discussed it long ago. Since Li Hanzhong prevented Su Buling from intervening, someone must have encouraged Su Buling. She had been prepared for a long time and was waiting for the news, but she didn't expect that the old master in Yuelu Mountain could use Ning Yuhi's incident to make Su Buling have to follow him to take a look. Xiao Qi sat behind the desk, thought for a moment, took out the map of Daiyuo, with several lines drawn on it, and said softly, King Wu is going to Bodhi Island to look for a certain object. I originally planned to arrange for someone to go there and take a look. Knowing that you are also curious, I wanted to take a boat together and go around for a while before returning to Suzhou. But if we go to the Tang family on the way, no, how can we go by the way? I can only go there by boat and sea. You can travel lightly by yourself and accompany Ning Yuhi by horseback and by land. After we are done, we will meet in Binzhou, then go to Bodhi Island together, and then go back to Suzhou directly along the Yellow River. What do you think? I'm afraid this is the so-called good wife. Everything was arranged clearly. Su Buling couldn't fault it at all, so he didn't waste any time on it and kissed Xiao Qi on the mouth. Master has run away overnight, and I have to catch up to avoid any accidents. After you arrange the affairs of the Xiao family, take Luan Xiang'er and the others to set off by boat. I will wait for you in Binzhou. Xiao Qi waved her hand, go ahead. Since I agreed to marry you, I will take care of the back house in order, so you don't have to worry about it. Time was a bit rushed. After Su Buling held Xiao Qi's cheek and kissed her for a few times, he turned around and left the Xiao family's ancestral home without any lingering feelings. Back in the house, Su Buling picked up Manzi, who had just fallen asleep. The reason why he brought Zhu Manzi with him was because the Tang family was the culprit who wiped out the entire Zhu family. With such a deep blood feud, Manzi naturally could not be absent. Because most of the girls had gone to bed, Su Buling did not disturb them. After saying goodbye to Aunt Lu and Xiang'er, he took the wind-chasing horse from the stable and galloped out of the manor with Manzi and Nightingale. Volume 6 Jiangnan Misty Rain Chapter, End. Volume 710 Long Pohe Chapter, to be determined, please look forward to it. Thanks to QQ Reading Garfield for the leader reward. Thank you will stop for the 35,000 reward. Thank you Sandwich Pine Nut Cake for the 15,000 reward. Thank you for the 10,000 reward from Steamed Egg Soup. I already owe more than 500, and if I owe more, everyone will think it's fake. I'd better pay off the current debt first. The policy of adding chapters will change slightly after October 1st. It will be changed to one chapter for every 30,000 rewards. I will change it after I pay off the more than 300 chapters I owe. Otherwise, after finishing the book, I will owe more than 1,000 chapters, and I will become a deadbeat. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Prince is Very Fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 483. The trees are old, the leaves are sparse, and the people are old and have their heads lowered. A mother sells her son, a father sells his daughter, and no one picks up the horse-drawn carriage. The cold wind carried snow particles and fell on the small square of Fenglingdu town. An old beggar, wearing a tattered quilt, huddled beside the steps outside the inn, banging an old bowl and humming a ballad made up by someone. At the entrance of the inn, two wolf guards dressed in black stood with swords in their hands. They were so solemn that the Jianghu people who were joining in the fun under the Gaimengguan archway disappeared without a trace. The Jianghu people who had just arrived also backed away after seeing it, for fear of attracting the attention of the wolves. Wei's attention. The waiter had a towel on his shoulders. Seeing that no customer dared to come to the door, he felt anxious, but he dared not speak out and stood in the lobby honestly waiting for orders. As for why the old beggar who sang folk songs was not chased away, it was not because the wolf guard was reasonable, but because he had just chased him away and was stopped by someone. The brazier was still burning in the lobby of the inn. Song Ying, the chief officer of the wolf guard, held a poker in his hand and sat on a stool to fiddle with the charcoal fire. At the table where Su Buletinling used to eat noodles, there was an old man in red robe with grey hair. He folded his sleeves with his hands and squinted at the archway outside the door. He had a gaunt figure and his face was full of wrinkles left over from the years. How energetic is the old beggar outside the door. As one of the three chief officers of the Criminal Investigation Department, Song Ying holds the position of head catcher. She is used to frighten the Jianghu and arrest the A-level gangsters. She is regarded as the double red stick of the imperial court and one of the most capable warriors under the emperor. At this moment, facing the sleepy old eunuch in front of her, Song Ying looked somewhat respectful, like a junior warming up by the fire with his elders. The old beggar's song was finished. Eunuch Chia, who had half-closed eyes, finally came to his senses and whispered in a hoarse voice. When I followed Emperor Xiaozong into Chang'an and passed by Fenglingdu, I heard this ditty. At that time, we had been fighting for more than 10 years, and there were 10 houses and 9 empty houses everywhere. Anyone who could hold a bowl and beg for food was considered a strong man. Song Ying was less than 40 years old, the age at which a martial artist was at his peak, and he came from a wealthy family. He might have heard what he said to Eunuch Chia, but he had certainly never experienced it. He responded softly. I heard from my grandfather that at that time, even the Cao family had to tighten their belts and live a life. If they had not had some status in the world, they might have been robbed by the mob. Emperor Xiaozong loved the people like his sons. After the governance of 2 monarchs, the world is much better. Eunuch Chia shook his head and sighed softly. Our family watched Emperor Xiaozong found the country, and watched the late emperor return to the prosperous times of the Central Plains dynasty. Now we are worried, and then watch this 100-foot-high building collapse. When a war begins, the person who benefits will. However, it is true that the people of the world are suffering. You are young and have never seen it with your own eyes, So you don't understand what kind of life it was like. Song Ying was indeed a young boy in front of eunuch Chia. She nodded and chuckled without denying it. After resting for a while, eunuch Chia stood up, walked out of the inn, and said, "Actually, our family also sneaked into this archway back then, but it's a pity that we have never been to the Jianghu in this life. Now, in this life, we have never been there, it's almost finished." After saying that, he passed through the ghost gate, which can be regarded as a beginning and an end, and then together with the wolf guard, embarked on the road to Yuzhu. Chuland, Ezhu. Two fast horses galloped across the wilderness covered in snow. Riding on the snow horse from Mobei, the swordsman Ding Yuan glanced back at the guest pavilion that was getting further away. King Song Zhengping of Chu stood in it, seeing each other off from afar. Next to Ding Yuan is a middle-aged Taoist priest wearing a black Quanzhen Taoist robe. The Taoist magic sword engraved with yin and yang fish is slung on his back. He is extremely tall and has slender limbs. His wide Taoist robe sticks to his body in the wind. His waist is as strong as a tiger and leopard. He looks like he doesn't have the immortal spirit of an ordinary Taoist priest, but is rather domineering. If a Taoist priest can be dubbed the Wudayan killing god, it can be seen that he is by no means a calm and gentle person. Compassion is the essence of Buddhism. Since Chandayazai came out of the mountain, he has been famous in the world for his thunderous temper. He is surrounded by a forbidden land of thunder and fire. Dragons and tigers have to lie down, and the guests in the world are difficult to deal with. Counting, no one dares to take revenge so far. Seeing the figure of Chu King Song Zhengping disappear from sight, Ding Yuan turned around and whispered. The prince has repeatedly warned that the thing must be brought back, otherwise it would rather be destroyed than fall into the hands of others. I also hope that Master Chen will do his best to assist Ding. Chen Daozai raised his hand casually, stopped Ding Yuan from speaking, and said calmly. Wu Dang has been under the care of the king of Chu for many years. No matter what he is looking for, if he asks me for help, he will help me and keep his mouth shut. No need to say anything. Ding Yuan thought carefully and then said, Su Buling, the prince of Prince Su, has also been in Jiangnan recently. The prince speculates that the Su family is also related to this matter. If he meets Su Buling in Yuzhu, Dao Kang Chen should not kill him and drive him out. That's it, otherwise it won't end well. Nu. Huainan, Xiajiazhuang. In the ancestral house of the Xiao family, Xiao Ting succeeded the family head and was listening to many uncles discussing matters in the meeting hall. Xiao Qi had almost finished the handover and was already at leisure. She was rummaging through the boudoir alone, neatly placing the items she had collected since she was a child into a box, preparing to take them to Suzhou as a souvenir for her wife. The Xiao family may have a collection habit inherited from their ancestors. Xiao Xiang liked to collect strange and clever objects. He once filled a palace with them. After his death, Xiao Qi brought them back from Chang'an and loaded them on a ship. Xiao Qi is different from her sister in that she likes to collect books, especially rare books, like the jade tree in the Spring Palace. As long as it is rare, no matter what is written on it, she likes to collect it, and rarely shows it to others. This may also be related to Xiao Qi's character, who likes to control the overall situation. Only if she knows more than others can she gain the opportunity to control the situation. The carefully organized books in the study were piled up like a mountain. Xiao Qi was looking through them. She was about to get married. The evil books such as Secrets of the Jade Room and Top 10 Famous Weapons should have been destroyed, otherwise they would be destroyed by future generations. The husband realized that something must have happened. But Xiao Qi hesitated for a long time while holding it in her hand, but she still didn't want to throw away the lone copy that she had finally collected. She found a small box and put it neatly, and locked it with a copper lock, and then she felt at ease. While they were sorting things out, Lan Hua walked to the door and said that Zhongli Jiju was visiting. Xiao Qi put down the things in her hands and went out to the living room. When she saw Zhongli Jiju sitting in the living room, she was slightly confused. "Miss Jiju, do you have anything to do with me?" Zhongli Jiju stood up and bowed gently. "Miss Xiao, do you know where Prince Su and Ningyu went together?" Zhongli Jiju woke up this morning and found that a bunch of girls were suddenly missing from the house. After searching around the house for a few times, she found that her rivals Ningyu He and Su Buling had run away. Lu Hongluan only knew that Su Buling had gone out, not know where to go. Zhongli Jiju didn't know why, so he could only ask Xiao Qi. Xiao Qi asked the maid to get a cup of tea, and said with a chuckle, "I'm going out to do some errands." Miss Jiju has something to do with Su Buling. Well, Zhongli Jiju didn't know what to say. Her purpose of staying with Su Buling was to compete with Ningyu, and Su Buling was the key. Without these two, she would have no meaning of existence. However, these words obviously cannot be said to the outside world. Zhongli Jiju thought about it and said softly, "Last month, Prince Su gave me a monthly salary and asked me to stay with him so that I could seek medical advice. I left in such a hurry yesterday. I must have done something important. If I was injured or something, no one in the world can compare to me. It's more useful. I have a salary and can't just eat at home, so I came here to ask if I could follow. Something happened suddenly last night. Su Buling was a contemporary military leader and he went to chase someone. Xiao Qi never thought that Su Buling would be injured. Now when I heard Zhongli Jiju talk about it, I felt that I should take a doctor with me when I go out. After all, Su Buling has a bit of an impulsive personality. If he meets a certain Wu Kuei on a narrow road, something may go wrong. Don't be afraid of 10,000, just be afraid of the worst." Thinking of this, Xiao Qi did not hesitate and said softly, "I'm going to the Tang family in Yuzhu, but Su Buling's horse is very fast, and Miss Jiju may not be able to catch up." Zhongli Jiju smiled softly, "You just need to know the place. Taking a boat is too slow. I'll ride over there and I should be able to catch up. I'll be more at ease if I arrive a day early." Seeing this, Xiao Qi nodded lightly and didn't say much. Zhongli Jiju stood up to say goodbye and quickly returned to the house to pack her things and prepare to go out to catch up. But after Zhongli Chuchu got up, she also found that Su Buling and Ning Qingyi were missing, and they were wondering about their whereabouts. Seeing Zhongli Jiju packing his things when he came back, Zhongli Chuchu quickly stepped forward and asked, "Master, where are you going?" Zhongli Jiju put away the bottles and jars, glanced at his apprentice, his eyes flickered, and he didn't mean to let Zhongli Chuchu follow him. He just said, "I'm going to the Tang family in Yuzhu. You can take the boat with Xiao Qi and the others. Don't run around these days." Zhongli Chuchu knew about the grievances between Ning Yuhi and the Tang family in Yuzhu, and understood that Su Buling should have gone with Ning Yuhi to seek revenge. Seeing that the master did not take her, she felt unhappy. She was not powerless. "Miss Song, it's not a bad thing to have a lot of helpers by your side." Zhongli thought for a while and said softly, "Master, let's go together. It just so happens that I can also help Mr. Su. He has helped me many times before." Zhongli Jiju was afraid that she would not be able to catch up with Su Buling after a long delay, and had no intention of discussing it. She carried the small package and walked out. "Chu Chu is obedient and stay on the boat honestly. I will come find you in a few days." As he said then he jumped out of the courtyard wall and disappeared into the courtyard. Zhongli Chuchu looked at the courtyard wall, slightly confused, feeling that his master was a little weird these days. But the master didn't let her follow him, maybe because he had something important to do, and it was hard to force him. With this in mind, Zhongli Chuchu returned to the back house and sat alone for a while, but felt something was wrong again. Ning Qingyi can follow, why can't she? It's not like she's not as good as Ning Qingyi. Zhongli frowned and thought for a moment, a little unconvinced, and with the intention of following him to have a look, he moved his white camel out of the stable. After a long time, in the empty house, Song Yufu, who was tired of reading in the room, walked out of the boudoir, stretched, walked slowly to the yard, walked around a few times, and then, Chu-chu, Manzi, King Yi, Mr. Su, huh? Where is the person? Stop hiding, I saw you, just behind the flower pot, ha, I found you, hey. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 484. 3 days later, in the Weishan Lake area near Suzhou, Ning Yu dismounted and let the long-distance running horse drink water by the stream. He took a small coat from the package and put it on himself. As the new year approaches, the weather gets colder as we go north. Most of the pedestrians on the official road are wrapped in thick sheepskin jackets, and the white mist exhaled from the noses and mouths of horses and mules can be seen in the distance. The area from Qingzhou to Yuzhou, that is, the east and west roads of Shandong, is located in the northeast corner of the Dayo territory. It is only a stone's throw away from the Mobai barbarians and far away from the imperial capital Chang'an. It is considered a remote place, but Yuzhou and other places are close to the sea and are rich in products. It is not as poor as the western regions. As a result, Qingzhou, Yuzhou and other places have almost become gathering places for Jianghu people. Except for the cities where heavy border defense troops are stationed, Jianghu people gather in other places. The local folk customs have always been tough, the government control is not enough, and the customs are much rougher than Chuland. Suzhou is still several hundred miles away from Jeju. The towns along the way are relatively stable, but they are certainly not as good as Hangzhou, Jinling and other places. The caravans on the road are armed with weapons, and there are more and more Jianghu travelers walking. When they went out to travel around the world, both the master and the apprentice wore curtains and hats to hide their beautiful faces. After running around for days, their bodies were also a little dusty. It was already getting late, and he should have gone to the town ahead to rest and continue on the road tomorrow, but Ning Yuhi's face looked a little strange. He put his hand on his belly and looked at the horse that lowered its head to drink water. He didn't know what he was thinking. Ning Qingyi was wearing a long white dress with a long sword on her back, looking quite heroic. At this time, while packing his luggage, he saw Ning Yuhi standing by the stream in a daze, and said softly, "Master, we are arriving in town soon. Find an inn and rest." Oh! Ning Yuhi pursed his lips, turned around, and walked up to him. He wanted to say something, but he hesitated. "A few days ago, I heard from Su Danking that Zulu went to the Tang family." Ning Yuhi ran out of the house without thinking, and took Qingye with him as a companion. But as he walked, Ning Yuhi thought of himself, the guard sand is gone. She and Qingye have been dependent on each other for many years, and they are both women. For safety and saving money when traveling, they always share a room and sleep together at night. You can't sleep without taking off your clothes, and you also need to change your underwear when traveling long distances. Qingyi knew her body very well, and if it was covered with hair, she could tell it was abnormal at a glance. The role of the palace guard sand is self-evident. Now that it is gone, if Qingyi sees it, he will definitely ask who broke her body. How will she answer? It cannot be said that it was accidentally caused by martial arts. The palace guard sand must be in harmony with the man's yin and yang to disappear. This reason is simply untenable. Ning Yuhi was on tenterhooks for the past 2 days, fearing that Ning Qingyi would see the problem. Fortunately, Su Buling was an excellent painter, and there was no difference between the fake and the real one. Ning Qingyi didn't notice anything strange. The paint that may not be used is not permanent and is slightly waterproof, but the color will fade and disappear after a few days. Ning Yuhi had noticed that the color had faded last night, and was so scared that he didn't dare to close his eyes all night. After another day and night, he might not be able to see the pattern anymore. If he took off his clothes at the inn, wouldn't everything be exposed? Ning Yuhi looked at the slightly confused apprentice, hesitated for a long time, and said softly, "King Yi, I thought about it carefully. The Tang family is my personal enemy. I shouldn't have brought you here. I can handle it by myself, how about you go back?" "What reason is this?" Ning Qingyi was confused. Let's not say whether it was a matter of personal enmity. She had been with him for 3 or 4 days, and he asked her to go back without any trouble. Wasn't it a joke? "Master, you are not going to kill anyone. You are just trying to prevent Zulu from killing the wrong person. I can still have a companion with you. I have traveled so far and you ask me to go back. Su Buletinling's ship has all gone. Where can I go back?" "Go." Ning Yuhi just remembered this. According to the scheduled date, Su Buling's boat to pick up the bride had already set off, and he would not be able to catch up when he returned. He couldn't let Qingye go to Suzhou alone. It was more than 5,000 miles away. How could he walk alone? Ning Yuhi pursed his lips, unable to find an excuse to let Ning Qingyi leave, so he could only nodded. "That's all, then you can just follow. My mind is a little confused and I keep thinking about the past. We will need 2 rooms in the future. I want to be alone for a while." When Ning Qingyi heard this, she tilted her head slightly. "Master, do you dislike me? What did I do wrong?" "No, no." Ning Yuhi knew that Ning Qingyi would ask such a question due to Ning Qingyi's dull temper. She couldn't explain it, so she could only bite the bullet and said softly, "Why do I find you annoying? I just want to stay alone for one night." Ning Qingyi saw that her master was a little depressed. Although she had doubts, she couldn't ask any more questions and nodded. Ning Yuhi Jiaomei's cheeks were full of tangles, but she couldn't draw by herself, so she could only drag it out day by day, slowly following her apprentice to the town. At the same moment, on the official road outside Weishan Lake, horse bells jingled in the wind and snow, and 2 tall horses galloped past the town and continued to gallop north. Su Buring was wearing a black fox fur he bought on the road. The winter wind was biting, and he also got a felt hat and put it on his head. There were several weapons hanging on the side of the horse. In addition to the dragon-patterned sword and the sword, he also carried the drunken bamboo sword that had been brought out from the palace and had never been sharpened, all wrapped in black cloth. The nightingale next to her was also wearing a fox fur, but her figure was too thin. The broad fox fur was wrapped around her body, and her face was almost invisible. At first glance, she looked like she was carrying a bundle of quilts on a tall horse. Zhu Manzi originally sat on Nightingale's horse, but Nightingale was too thin to block the cold wind, so she sat behind Su Buling. Instead of wearing a thick fox fur, she hid directly under Su Buling's fox fur, hugging Su Buling's waist tightly. The weather was bitterly cold, but it was obviously very warm inside the fox fur. As Su Buletinling galloped, he could clearly feel the soft cushions on his back getting hot, and he seemed to be sweating. Sometimes he would lift his fox fur to let some cool air in, making him shiver from the cold. After going back and forth like this several times, Su Buling felt helpless and said softly, "Manzi, if you feel hot, come out for some air. What should you do if you get stuffy?" Zhu Manzi heard the sound, rubbed his face and poked his face out from behind Su Buling's shoulder. The cold wind blew on his face, and he shrank his neck due to the cold, and said softly, "Why is it already dark? Where are you?" "Weishan Lake, there are still more than 40 miles to Lanling. We will find an inn to rest after entering the city." "Oh." Zhu Manzi hummed softly, resting his cheek on Su Buling's shoulder, looking at the countryside beside the road idly. After setting off from Huainan, the 3 of them were chasing master and apprentice Ning Yuhi. There was no communication method and they didn't know which road they were taking. They could only chase in the general direction towards Yuzhu and inquire about Ning Yuhi's story on the only way. Whereabouts? There are many roads in the world, and the appearance of Ning Yuhi, master and disciple, must be hidden. It is not easy to find out the whereabouts of Ning Yuhi, and he has never been found. Su Buling couldn't stop, so he could only run towards Yuzhu as fast as possible, thinking that if he couldn't find it, he would rush to Tang's house in advance. It was better to go early and wait than to go late. The long road was long and the journey was tiring. Zhu Manzi leaned against it for a while. He was really bored and began to look for words. "Mr. Su, are you bored? Do you want me to ride with you instead?" The nightingale next to me was actually very bored. She turned her head and said softly, "Your legs are too short to ride such a big horse." Hey! Zhu Manzi suddenly became unhappy. She had been riding a horse in Chang'an for so long, and it was not like she had never ridden a horse before. She said dissatisfiedly, "You still have the nerve to accuse me, the little bean sprout seems to be riding such a big horse, just like a little monkey riding a horse." Nightingale grew up in Suzhou, where there are many iron cavalry, and her riding skills are not very good, so she just snorted lightly. The bickering between the two girls may be the only fun while traveling. Su Buling was a little amused. After thinking about it, he hugged Manzi who was sitting behind him directly in front of him. He moved back a little, let her sit in his arms, wrapped her in fox fur, and then handed her the reins. Zhu Manzi had been a wolf guard for a year, and his riding skills were certainly not bad, but he was a little unable to perform well while sitting in Su Buling's arms. He took the reins, said a symbolic drive dash, and then looked at him with provocative eyes. Glanced at the nightingale. Nightingale didn't care at all. Zhu Manzi lost interest and rode a wind-chasing horse galloping in the snowy night. The cold wind was biting. His big eyes were slightly squinted and there was no room for maneuver. He was about to make up a story to entertain Su Buling when he suddenly realized something is wrong. Su Buling wrapped Manzi with fox fur, and the soft fragrance of nephrite in his arms hit people. Seeing that the nightingale didn't pay attention, he quietly stuffed his hands into Manzi's clothes to keep warm. I have to say that after half a year, Manzi has obviously grown a bit bigger. Although not as spectacular as Aunt Lu, she is still outstanding compared to other girls. Zhu Manzi's face turned red, and he twisted a few times, trying to squeeze Su Buling's hand away, but to no avail. He was also afraid of being discovered by Nightingale, so he could only hold the reins in a polite manner and make a gesture. Seriously riding a horse. Su Buling liked Manzi's silly look the most. He tapped his hand twice and said with a smile, "Manzi, why don't you talk? It's quite boring on the road. Let's talk about Duanershu." Zhu Manzi's face was so red that it looked like she was about to bleed, and her breathing was unsteady, but she couldn't say anything. She could only put on her usual smiling face and said softly, "Well, I said it in my last letter, what was it talking about?" The old sword master asked about the sword's Baichi cliff. "Yes, my grandfather used to be. Nightingale is extremely smart, and she gets along with Su Buling day and night. She even knows the baby's favorite posture at night, so naturally she can tell that something is wrong with Zhu Manzi's current situation. However, Nightingale is a girl in her early 15 years after all, and she is not shy. Instead, her big eyes have a hint of schadenfreude. She is also very cooperative with her young master. Whenever Zhu Manzi cannot hold on anymore and wants to raise his hand to block the dodge. At that time, he deliberately turned his head and glanced at it. Xiao Manzi was so frightened that he sat down quickly, not daring to show anything strange. Today I finished writing the detailed outline of Tenlong breaking the sea. It took me 5 hours to write the detailed outline. It was too time-consuming, so I only coded 6,000 words, and there was still some water left. I'm really sorry. Thank you book friend 201910241639547990 for the great reward. Thank you book friend 2020071800124025 for the great reward. It's the last day of September, and the current monthly ticket ranking is 99. Big guys, please give me a monthly ticket. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 485. Tap tap tap. In the blink of an eye, 10 days later, Zhongli Jiju walked alone from south to north, stopped outside Fanyang County, and looked at the old city amid the snow and wind with a slightly blank look. 10 years ago, Zhongli Jiju first came out of the world and traveled around the world. He once came to Yuzhou. At that time, Dao's late emperor was still there, and the rivers and lakes were still the same. The leader of Yuzhou was Zhuzhou Mountain, which was far away from the Lu family in Qingzhou. Below it were the 12 gates of the East China Sea, the Tang family of Yuzhou, and other rivers and lakes. The aristocratic family is almost the core area of the entire Dao Jianghu. People in Jianghu do not adhere to the law, but the long-standing sect family attaches great importance to rules. As long as you stay within the jurisdiction of each sect, do not offend local speakers, and do business or move around, there will generally be no problems. When Zhongli Jiju came to Fanyang County for the first time, the official roads were crowded with people carrying swords and swords. The notice boards under the city gates were not official edicts, but the recent major events in the world, such as a certain the knight-errant sent by the faction became the 8th leader of the contemporary era, and a certain knight-errant went to the 12 doors of the East China Sea to compete in the hall and became famous all over the world, etc. The scene was like the results of the imperial examination, attracting the hearts and minds of all warriors. I remember that at that time, the presence of the imperial court was very weak. Sometimes everyone in the martial arts competition would compete, and the local governor and magistrate would come to act as the master of ceremonies and establish a good relationship with the local warriors. It was also at that time that Zhongli Jiju saw the unattainable elegance of the Bakuai on the notice board under the city gate, and for the first time the idea of becoming a Bakuai came into his mind. Just 10 years, fleeting. Zhongli Jiju came to the place where the dream began again, but things had changed. The 2-foot-high city wall was still towering, but it obviously lost its former vigor. 4 officers and soldiers holding big guns leaned lazily under the city gate, basking in the warm winter sun after the heavy snow cleared. The notice board outside the city gate is still there, but it no longer has the grand scene of being watched by everyone. There are several yellowed notices pasted on the old wooden sign. The notices list the bandits wanted by the government. The portraits are blurry and some are blurry. The notice was incomplete and had not been replaced for an unknown period of time. In Zhongljiju's impression, the border between Fanyang County and Jizhu is a must-pass for the two sides, and it is very prosperous. At this time, all the well-dressed people in the world were gone, only a few people running around in the world were left. They were also busy in and out quickly. Along the official road, you could often see ordinary people with sallow skin and thin skin, carrying mountain goods to sell in the city. The wealthy master who used to recruit thugs and bodyguards at the city gate also disappeared, and the entire county seemed dead. Zhongli Jiju took the big red horse and walked to the notice board to take a few glances. Only then did she realize that the iron eagle hunting deer that year had devastated the Jianghu in the Central Plains. Maybe the entire Fanyang County was the only one left. The peasants turned their backs to the loess. However, rivers and lakes are rivers and lakes after all. They may be silent and hidden underground for a while, but they will never disappear. Zhongli Jiju led the horse into the county town and searched for a moment on the desolate streets in winter. With the memories of the past, she came to a small inn on a small street in the West City. The small street is not long. There are several brothels and gambling houses, and the business is not booming. Under the eaves of the inn, a middle-aged man wearing a felt hat was leaning on a lounge chair, holding a purple clay pot in his hand. Next to him was a young man, who should be the middle-aged man's apprentice, smiling and saying something. The middle-aged man Zhongli and Jeju knew each other. He was an information dealer in Fanyang City, named Lu Wu. Jianghu people generally refer to this kind of people as white paper fans. They rely on this kind of people to contact business and inquire about information. The relationship between black and white is very close. Even the emperor of Chang'an City can get along well. Tai Ying deer hunting will naturally not be affected. Zhongli Jeju walked over and sat down on the chair opposite the lounge chair. Lu Wu's apprentice Li Lin stopped talking and saw Zhongli Jeju's beautiful face. His eyes lit up slightly and he spoke first. This isn't your first time coming to Fanyang County, right? It looks unfamiliar, but the place seems quite familiar. Lu Wu held the purple clay pot, glanced at it with half-squinted eyes, closed it again, and said softly, 110 e-book. You girl, you're not dead yet? Who are you planning to come here to harm? It was not surprising that Zhongli Jeju was recognized by the other party. Everyone has a good memory in this profession. She was young when she was making waves in the world of Yuzhu, and even tied up Su Danking, a painting saint who was in the limelight. If you don't remember her, you would be incompetent. Shopkeeper Lu has a good memory. I'm only in my early 20s. If nothing unexpected happens, I'm afraid I can send you away first. I'm not here to harm anyone this time, I'm just looking for someone. He. Lu Wu glanced at the silver ingots on the tea table and nodded. Tell me, there have been a lot of people coming here recently, and I'm afraid there will be a big mess. For the sake of repeat customers, I want to remind you, be careful. Come in and go out sideways. Zhongli Jeju offended many people in Taoism when he was young and frivolous. He didn't care about it and asked with a chuckle. Shopkeeper Lu is interested. I want to inquire about the whereabouts of a young master, about 20, half a head taller than your apprentice, riding a snow horse from Mobei, with an entourage. According to time calculation, he should have passed through Fanyang County in the past 2 days. It may have passed. Has shopkeeper Lu seen it? Lu Wu squinted his eyes and remained silent for a moment, raised his hand to slide the silver ingot on the tea table over, and nodded. At noon the day before yesterday, there was such a person passing through the city. He did not stop and his whereabouts are unknown. The girl rested in the city for one night. I will send someone to inquire about it and send the news to the girl tomorrow morning. Thank you. Zhongli Jeju finally found her whereabouts and felt a lot more relaxed. She stood up and made a courteous gesture before leading her horse out of the street. Lu Wu threw the silver to his apprentice Li Lin and said softly, go and ask around. There are 2 women and 1 man, 3 people and 2 horses. The man has a knife, a sword, and a gun. They are heading north. Li Lin put away the silver ingot, his eyes still fixed on the direction where Zhongli Jeju disappeared. After a slight hesitation, he leaned over and asked, Master, who is this girl? This is the first time I've seen such a beautiful girl walking around the world. Ye Juniang, from Nanyu, competed with Ning Yuhi for the Suanhe 8 champions before, so she is naturally beautiful. But she is very good at using poison. She was young and didn't know the rules before, so she offended many people when she was traveling in Yuzhu. Oh. Li Lin nodded slightly, rolled his eyes, and asked again. Who did you offend? Lu Wu held the purple clay teapot, was silent for a while, opened his eyes and glanced at his apprentice. In our line of work, we don't ask what we shouldn't ask, and don't say what we shouldn't say, otherwise, we will die early. Li Lin's face froze, and he nodded quickly, I'm just curious, it's rare for a girl to travel the world. There were many in the past, but the world is going downhill, and people's hearts are not as good as before. Lu Wu raised his hand casually, closed his eyes and leaned back on the recliner. Li Lin nodded and trotted out of the alley. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 486. He took the two girls and galloped on horseback. After traveling for more than 10 days, they finally arrived in Yuzhou. On the bank of Longfeng River, Su Buling got off his horse and waited at the ferry for carriages and horses to cross the river. Yuzhou is 2,000 miles away from Chang'an, which is considered a place with high mountains and far away from the emperor. However, there is no king of Yan among the 7 vassal kings. The local military and political affairs in Yuzhou are managed by the Liaoxi Protectorate, which is an area directly under the jurisdiction of the imperial court. The strongest military forces in Dayu are piled here, facing the northern Qi Middle Route Army head-on. And the Right Army. The Su family of King Su was defending Prince Zhou of the northern Qi dynasty and the tribes of the western regions. The combined troops on both sides were more than 400,000, which was considered a marginal battlefield. The area from the Yuzhou border to Taiyuan and other places is a frontal battlefield. The arms race between the two countries has accumulated a large number of troops. The entire Jiangnan and Shu regions are providing nutrients here. It has dragged down the famine in Jiangnan and even dared not reduce taxes. This shows how exaggerated it is. In the past, Yuzhou was the main area for smuggling salt and iron outside the customs, and it was considered a prosperous area. After iron eagle hunting deer swept through Yuzhou, Qingzhou and other places, the leaders of the Zhu family and the Lu family were defeated one after another, leaving the rivers and lakes without a leader. The merchants who relied on these forces as a protective umbrella also ran away. Now at the ferry of Longfeng River, only the next one is depressed, even a little barren. As the eldest son of the feudal lord, Su Buling actually understood Songji's approach. As a dignified ruler, he could not allow local merchants to blatantly smuggle salt and iron goods. Selling daily items was fine, but it would only severely damage tax revenue. Transport copper and iron to northern Qi. If northern Qi builds 30,000 more iron racks Hassa, they might be beaten back by northern Qi. Next to Su Buling, Zhu Manzi was wrapped in a small cotton-padded jacket, standing on the bank of the turbulent Longfeng River, and said with his little waist, "It looks very ordinary." Storytellers often talk about this place, saying that masters often pass by the Longfeng River, ride on unicorns and fly phoenixes, etc. I didn't expect that such a river is not as beautiful as the Fenhe River. Fenhe River is in Taiyuan, which is not far from Yuzhou. Su Buling stood in front, raised his arms around Manzi's shoulders, and chuckled. "After I'm done with the Tang family's business, I'll go back with you to take a look." Zhu Manzi shook his head. "My parents have run away. It's just a Osmanthus forest. If there's anything interesting to see, I'd better go to Zhu's house to see it. I heard that my grandfather is buried there, but I haven't visited the grave yet." Nightingale stood nearby, recalled it, and said softly, "After the old sword master died in the Zhu family's battle, the Wolf Guard originally wanted to bring the body to the capital, but I don't know who gave the order to bury the old sword master in the Zhu family's ancestral grave." Su Buling thought for a moment and said softly, "I heard Zhang Xiang mention it before. It was eunuch Jie who begged for mercy from the Zhu family, so he only killed all the men in the family. I guess it was eunuch Jie who ordered the grand burial of the old sword master. The older generation of Jianghu people are actually very moral, but it's really meaningless now." Zhu Manzi didn't know what happened back then, but it was a sad thing after all, so he didn't talk much about it. The ferry was not prosperous, and those who crossed the river were all local people traveling from north to south. After waiting for about an hour, dozens of people carrying baskets on their backs prepared to go into the city to buy New Year's goods, as well as travelers, gathered on the ferry. Su Buling was holding the one-of-a-kind wind-chasing horse, and he was relatively tall. He stood out among the crowd, and naturally attracted a lot of people's attention. No ordinary people dared to come over and strike up a conversation. A little girl aged 4 or 5 was attracted by the fox fur on Su Buling's body. She ran up to touch it and muttered strangely, "Brother, why are your clothes so hairy, just like a blind bear?" Su Buling looked at the little one who was not even taller than his waist. He was speechless and didn't know how to explain it. Zhu Manzi was very good at dealing with children, and he said cheerfully, "Little sister, what's wrong with your eyes? How can you be such a handsome blind man?" The little girl raised her head and glanced, nodding seriously, "That's right." He. Su Buling was completely speechless. He raised his hand and touched the little girl's head. The little girl's mother hugged her back, obviously afraid of offending the rich man in the city. Soon, several boats arrived at the ferry. The boatman wrapped in a thick coat put down the pedal and collected money one by one. Su Buling brought 2 horses, so he definitely couldn't get on the small boat, so he went to a larger one. However, the largest ship could only carry more than 20 people. After the 2 big horses came on, they occupied 1/3 of the deck, and they had to pay a few more pennies for this. The current of Longfeng River is very fast, and there are reefs and rocks in the lower part of the river. It is considered a relatively dangerous place. Sitting on a boat is like drifting. The boatman swung his bamboo pole from side to side on the river to skillfully go around the reef, but the passengers on the boat were a little frightened. There were quite a lot of people in the local arena in Yuzhou. There was a ranger who looked to be in his 20s on the boat. He was leaning against the fence of the ferry with his sword in his arms. Maybe he was a little bored during the journey. He kept looking at the handsome Chai Fengma and finally left. When he arrived, he raised his hand and made a quaint salute. "Brother, the horse is pretty good." The rivers and lakes are all about grudges, and it is common to talk and make friends while riding in the same boat, but after traveling so far, this is the first person who dares to chat with Su Buling. Su Buling glanced at him. He had an ordinary appearance and an ordinary temperament, but he was very clean and comfortable to look at. He didn't look like a gangster in the world. The sword he held in his hand looked very primitive, and the wooden handle was patinated. It was obvious that he had been holding it for many years, and no matter how skilled he was at least very diligent. Seeing this scene, Su Buling did not ignore it. He turned around and raised his hand. "Thank you, brother." Seeing Su Buling's response, Yuxia smiled a little and said cheerfully, "I'm Zhou. I see that you are also a martial artist. May I ask your name?" Zhu Manzi was just bored and finally encountered a scene of making friends with people from the underworld. He quickly raised his hand to perform an underworld salute and said generously, "I am Zhu Manzi, nicknamed Fenhe Sword God. This is Nightingale, nicknamed Yeli Meng, and this is Eagle Finger Wanderer Su Shan." Zhou Zhan blinked, obviously a little surprised, and wanted to laugh but felt it was inappropriate. Worry-free Chinese website. Su Buling was also a little amused, raised his hand and said, "The surname Zhou is rare. Are you from Luoyang?" Zhou Zhan was slightly stunned when he heard this. "How did you know that, sir?" Nightingale had a bit of pride in her eyes, and explained softly, "The surname Zhou originated from the surname Zhang. In ancient times, the area around Luoyang was granted the title of Zhou State. Later generations took the state as their surname. Where did all the people with the surname Zhou in the world originate from?" Zhou Zhan showed some surprise in his eyes, and nodded, "You are from a noble family, right? You are really knowledgeable. Even I don't know much about these things." Su Buling knew this because he recently investigated the hiding place left by Zhou Jixian, and specifically asked Xiao Qi about this. Now he used it and pretended to be a knowledgeable scholar. "I just read about this occasionally." "Where are you going, brother Zhou?" Zhou Zhan is very talkative. He shook his head and smiled. Traveling around the world is just running around. A few days ago, I passed by Fanyang County. When I was selling wine in a wine shop, I happened to meet a hot-tempered swordsman. He was old and had a bad temper. He only had one pot of wine left. He relied on his seniority to let me give it to him. I asked, "Who are you?" He said, "Sword Master Situ Ejin," and I said, "I am the Sword Saint Zulu." Zhu Manzi was listening, and when he heard this, he was immediately unhappy and glared at him fiercely. Su Buling was actually intrigued, and asked with a smile, "What was the result?" Zhou Zhan sighed, pulled up his sleeves, revealing 5 clear instructions on his wrist, and shook his head. "In the end, I was almost beaten to death. I didn't see clearly and was pushed to the ground. Not only did I give up the wine, but I had to pay for it. I haven't seen Senior Situ either, and I don't know if I met a real immortal. I wanted to get close to him and ask for his guidance, but I couldn't find him when I got up. I wasted a great opportunity in vain, so I tried my luck and looked around." Su Buling nodded gently. "Situ Ejin is the #1 in Tianese woolen, that is, he is from Nanchang, which is closer to Nanyu, so it is not realistic for him to run to Yuzhu. For this ambiguous Jianghu gossip, it is just a bragging of Jianghu wanderers." While chatting, the ferry went to the center of the river, where the water is the most turbulent. The Longfeng River is quite dangerous. The reason why several boats go together every time is because there are frequent accidents of capsizing and sinking. The boat Su Buling was on was relatively large. The boatman was an old man who was very skilled and collected a high toll. He handled the boat smoothly and without any accidents. But a small boat in the distance hit something when passing a rotten rock beach. It suddenly spun on the river surface and threw several people sitting on the edge of the boat down. Ah! Someone fell into the water. The 2 boats around saw the scene and hurriedly paddled over. The people on the small boat were also frantically raising their hands to rescue people. The water flow was too fast, and the people who fell into the water were washed far away. The boat was spinning and lost its stability. Only one man grabbed the bamboo pole that was stretched out. Su Buling frowned slightly and glanced, but saw that the little girl who touched his clothes just now might have been too naughty and didn't sit well, and was also thrown down and was bobbing in the turbulent river. The little girl's mother was so scared that her face turned pale. She threw herself at the side like crazy and raised her hands to grab it, but the distance was rapidly increasing and she couldn't touch it at all. In the cold winter, the river water was icy cold. If a child fell into it, he would either die on the rocks or freeze to death. Zhou Zhan, who was standing nearby, saw the scene and threw the sword to Su Buling without hesitation. He jumped into the water and swam towards the little girl with very quick movements. Zhu Manzi was also a little anxious. He lay on the edge of the boat and raised his hand to point, "Hurry up, it's just in front." Su Buling shook his head and sighed, leaned the sword on the boat, then jumped out of the ferry and landed on the water. Then his boots lightly touched the water, stepped on a string of water, and rushed straight to the center of the river. "Wow dash! Look!" There was a burst of exclamations from the 3 fairies at once. Zhu Manzi was slightly stunned, and then was shocked by the beauty. Zhou Zhan was swimming at full speed. He heard the footsteps of tap 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 behind him. He looked back in confusion and burst into a swear word in surprise, his eyes full of disbelief. Su Buling's body and mind were like willow leaves in the wind, sliding across the turbulent river surface. He raised his hand to grab the little girl who fell into the water, and landed steadily on the boat, stopping the boat spinning in the middle of the river. After putting the frightened little girl down, Su Buling did not stop, and repeated the trick to step on the water surface to return to the ferry. The cold wind was blowing, the rapids were surging, and the handsome young man was walking on the waves. The scene was like an immortal descending to the mortal world, and like a mortal stepping into the fairyland. The so-called true freedom in the world is probably just like this. The frightened little girl forgot to cry. She was shivering with cold and said stupidly, "Mom, what a handsome blind bear is flying." Su Buling crossed the river like a dragonfly skimming the water. When he passed by Zhou Zhan, who was floating in the water in a daze, he glanced at him. The way Zhou Zhan looked at him was exactly the same as the way he looked at Zulu last time, as if to say, "Flashy, not as fast as the masters, a pretentious person." Su Buling suddenly understood how Zulu and Li Hanzhong felt when they pursued him last time. Humph, weak chicken. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 487. It was getting dark, and the lights in the west city of Fanyang County were sparse. An inn was booked, and there were 2 Jianghu guests standing there, one of whom was Chang Shijian with a sword hanging on his waist. In the lobby of the inn, a dozen of the core figures of Dainglu were sitting at the table eating a simple meal. Li Hanzhong, Zulu, Mr. Pei, and Lu Hongxiu were sitting at the same table, and there was a map on the table. Dainglu is the top force in the world, famous for killing wolf guards. When recruiting people, they always strive for excellence rather than large numbers. In addition, the number of hidden stakes in various places is only 1,000 people, but in terms of combat power, it is estimated that only the emperor can match it. The secret guard within the city. There are more than a dozen people present, who are the core figures of Daing Tower. Most of them have famous names in the world, such as Zheng Yushan, the old leader of the Qing Cheng sect, Qiu Fengqing, the descendant of the Beiji sect, etc., and all of them are hung in the archives without exception. The list of heroes from all directions is overwhelming. Li Hanshen's expression was as gloomy as ever. After looking at the map for a few times, he said softly, "The Criminal Investigation Department has discovered our movements and will definitely come to Yuzhu. According to the news sent by the hidden stake, Song Ying will come over, and I heard that eunuch Jia has not shown up in recent days on the excuse of recuperating from illness. I guess Jia, my father-in-law, is here too." Zheng Yushan was considered older. Hearing these words, he turned his head. Eunuch Jia has never left Chang'an City in his life. He is almost 80 years old. Will he run to Yuzhu? Others also have this doubt. After all, Eunuch Jia's reputation as the guardian saint of Da Nei is too great. He has protected 3 monarchs for a period of time, and he has been assassinated countless times by enemy countries, vassals, and forces left over from the previous dynasty, but he has never been able to get close to Dayu. The emperor takes half a step. It's self-evident what kind of assassin he is who can be sent to assassinate Emperor Dayu, but after entering Chang'an, all of them disappeared without exception, so that in the world, there is no record of Eunuch Jia fighting anyone, and no one knows how strong he is. No. Such an old dragon king came to the small mud pond in the rivers and lakes to beat the autumn wind. Not to mention Zheng Yushan and others, even Zulu frowned slightly. Li Hanzhong frowned and thought for a moment. In order to deceive others, Zulu was asked to go to the Tang family in the name of revenge and cover up our whereabouts. The Tang family has a close relationship with the imperial court and will definitely ask for help from the imperial court. Song Ying is not sure about dealing with Zulu and me. It's not impossible to invite eunuch Jia out. Zulu rubbed the hilt of the sword with his fingers and was silent for a moment. Whether it is a dragon or an insect, you won't know until you come. You go to Bodhi Island as planned, and I will go to the Tang family alone. There were more than a dozen people there, and they all hesitated when they heard this. There is a big gap between the 10 military commanders. There is a difference of 2 Tang Jiao between the strong military commanders such as Zulu and Chen Daizai, and the weaker ones like Xuechenzi and Zhang Buhan. Song Ying was born in the Cao family of Junshan, and had been frightening the world for many years for the imperial court. He was obviously the top martial artist, not to mention eunuch Jia. No matter how powerful the sword master Zulu is, he can't stop Song Ying and eunuch Jia from joining forces. Going alone is no different from dying, but if Li Hanzhong also follows, no one will go to Bodhi Island for business. Li Hanzhong frowned, considered it for a moment, and said softly, the Tang family's matter needs to be a bigger deal to attract everyone's attention and avoid being discovered by others about the unusual activities on Bodhi Island. There is no point if you die too quickly. Zheng Yushan and I, Qiu Fengqing goes to Bodhi Island, and the others will follow you to the Tang family. If you meet eunuch Xia, you can delay it, but don't give up everything if you can't. Everyone nodded slightly, feeling that this method was more appropriate. After all, going to Bodhi Island was done in secret, and no outsiders knew about it. There was no need to go to so many people. Zulu is the top fighting force in Yinglu, and the name of Sword Master has great appeal in the world. It is not worth dying in the Tang family just to cover up, so it is better to protect Zulu. Mr. Pei sighed and nodded, that's all we can do. Get started as soon as possible. The longer you delay, the easier things will go wrong. Everyone nodded. After Li Hanzhong finished arranging things, he stood up, took Zheng Yushan and Qiu Fengqing out of the inn, and rushed to Bodhi Island in a light outfit. The 3 sects and 9 sects from the West City gathered together. Although there were not as many as before in the Jianghu, there were still quite a few. Li Hanzhong rode his horse through the street, and when he was about to walk out of the market entrance, he suddenly frowned and turned his head to look at the door of a small shop on the side of the road. At dusk, the West Street in Fanyang County. Ning Qingyi led the horse and walked beside Ning Yuhi. He had been running around for days, and his brows looked a little sleepy. Having entered Yuzhu, Ning Yuhi faced the place where he grew up. He was emotionally moved by the scene, and was inevitably a little sentimental. From time to time, he talked about things that happened when he was walking around Yuzhu when he was a child. The two of them came outside the inn on the small street. Lu Wu was still leaning on the recliner, shaking the purple clay pot in his hand. Ning Yuhi knew Lu Wu, so he handed the reins to Ning Qingyi, walked to a chair under the eaves and sat down, took out a piece of silver and put it on the tea table, and said softly, "Shopkeeper Lu." Lu Wu opened his eyes and took a look. After recognizing Ning Yuhi, he smiled softly and sat up. "What kind of day is it today? If it weren't for the lack of people in my inn, I would have thought I was back 10 years ago." Ning Yuhi was a little confused and thought she suddenly returned to Yuzhu. Lu Wu was surprised and just nodded and chuckled. "Something to come back, shopkeeper Lu, have you heard any news about Sword Master Zulu recently?" When Lu Wu heard this, he raised his hand to push the silver ingot back, shook his head and sighed, "How could I know this? Besides, you know the rules of the world. Even if you know the whereabouts of the Sword Master, do I dare to tell you?" Ning Yuhi knew that there were some coercive measures and asked the information dealer to sell Wu Kui's whereabouts, unless he wanted to reincarnate early after living enough. She smiled and said, "Zulu and I have no grudges. We are friends. I just want to talk to him about some trivial matters. If you know about it, please make it easier and give me away." Lu Hu shook his head, "I really don't know. Why don't you go and find out somewhere else?" Ning Yuhi knew the rules of Jianghu people, and he couldn't ask any questions no matter how much he asked, so he could only nodded, stood up and prepared to leave. "Pick a book." Lu Wu thought for a moment and then said, "Miss Ning, what happened back then is in the past. You shouldn't come back, especially at this time." "Thank you, I just came back to take a look." Ning Yuhi smiled lightly and said nothing more. Ning Qingyi led the horse and accompanied Ning Yuhi out of the small street, and said softly, "Master, Zulu hasn't made a move yet, let's go hide near the Tang family first, and wait for Zulu to make a move, and find a chance to say hello to him." "That's it?" Ning Yuhi nodded, and the two of them arrived at the inn where they were staying. "After a long journey, I had to wash up after falling down. It was too troublesome to go up and down stairs to get hot water. They should have washed together, but Ning Yu didn't dare to take a bath with Ning Qingyi, so he had to separate Ning Qingyi first and secretly go by himself. Wash well. Then he said softly. Qingyi, go to Wang's shop at the entrance of the market to buy some food and come back. The food there is delicious. You want it to be freshly cooked. I don't eat meat. Ning Qingyi didn't want to eat in the inn, so she went out alone. Arriving at the old shop at the entrance of the market, Ning Qingyi ordered a few famous local side dishes and stood at the door waiting. It is already dark, and people are coming and going in the market. As the new year is approaching, more and more people are returning to their hometowns. People they know often greet each other on the street, saying so and so hero, so and so hero. These little miscellaneous fish in the rivers and lakes sound a bit funny. Ning Qingyi leaned against the door with her sword in her arms. While she was lost in thought, she suddenly heard the sound of horse hooves approaching from far away. The corner of his eye glanced at the people on the horse, and Ning Qingyi was shaken all over. In a blink of an eye, the middle-aged scholar sitting on the horse looked very familiar, but compared to the face engraved in his bones, he looked a little older. Horse hooves trampled across the market. Li Hanzhong drove his horse forward. He noticed the scrutinizing eyes and looked at the small shop at the entrance of the market. The tall girl in white stood blankly at the door of the shop, with crescent-shaped eyebrows and star-like eyes. She was holding the sword Shang Chun. She looked very similar to her mother. She was no longer in the village of Shu. Ya's a little girl learning to speak. With a startling glance, Li Hanzhong was also stunned for a moment. It was also a cold winter day. For a moment, he seemed to have returned to the Bluestone Alley in Chang'an City. He was standing at the entrance of the alley buying paintings, and the chivalrous girl stretched out a hand. He could never change it at that time in his life. I remember the two of them playing games together, the two of them lighting candles and candles in the mountains to worship the heaven and the earth, the clumsiness of his 10th month of pregnancy, and the splitting headache he had when the little girl was born, looking through ancient books to find her name. Finally, she had an idea and said, if you give birth at night, the moon and stars are sparse, let's call it Qingyi. Qingyi. Li Hanzhong, who had forgotten what feelings were for many years, twitched slightly at the corners of his eyes. But that's all. When their eyes met for a moment, Li Hanzhong averted his gaze, and with two followers, he left the market entrance and sped towards the east. Ning Qingyi stood at the entrance of the shop, holding the sword tightly in his hand. He didn't react until the back figure disappeared from the end of the field of vision. After Li Hanzhong left with his book box on his back, she never saw the man she should call dad again, until the day her mother died in the wilderness. Walking through iron shoes, I was looking for the whereabouts of Li Hanzhong all the time, but I never wanted to meet him again, just like this on the street. There were no explanations as expected, nor was he a cold shoulder. He just glanced at her and left, just like a stranger. Li Hanzhong. Ning Qingyi clenched her mother's sword tightly, her knuckles turned white, and uncontrollable anger appeared in her eyes until she could no longer restrain herself. Li Hanzhong. With blood-red eyes, Ning Qingyi jumped up from the shop entrance, snatched a ranger's horse, and chased towards the market entrance, almost hysterical. Girl, girl. In Wang's shop, an elderly woman stood at the entrance of the shop carrying packed meals, watching the unfamiliar girl in white fly away. Jianghu is like this. There are often people who are eating and drinking in Jianghu. When something urgent happens, they leave with their swords in hand. Some people never come back. The old woman looked at the food in her hand, and after a long time, she shook her head. You should be content with enough food and clothing. You are so young, what kind of world are you trying to get into? Thank you to the boss man under the parasol tree for the 20,000 reward. Thank you Crisks for the huge reward. Thank you to Washmore sandwiched pine nut pancakes for the great reward. My brother is getting married tomorrow, I don't know if I can update on time. If the update is late, I'm sorry in advance orts. Happy National Day. Happy Mid-Autumn Festival. Asking for a monthly ticket. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 488. The market is noisy, and the streets are full of inns for people from all walks of life. In the room lit with incense, after Zhongli Jiju took a bath and cleaned herself, she sat in the room and played with the sparrow to pass the time. When she was bored, her ears twitched slightly, as if she heard Ning Qingyi's voice on the street. Zhongli Jiju was stunned and opened the window to take a look at the market. Unfortunately, it was already dark and the market was quite noisy. After scanning around for a few times, he could not find Ning Qingyi or Su Buling and the others. Maybe I heard something wrong. Zhongli Jiju looked a little confused and was about to close the window when she lowered her head and saw Lu Wu's apprentice Li Lin walking over. He raised his eyes to see her and made a distant salute. Zhongli Jiju's eyes lit up, and he walked down from the inn to the lobby with a kind smile. "Brother, have you heard the news?" Li Lin behaved elegantly and warmly, walked up to him and raised his hand gently. "I just sent the boys to inquire. The person the girl is looking for has gone to Shentangyu." Shentangyu. When Zhongli Jiju heard the name of such a place, she lightly raised her eyebrows. She knew Shentangyu, it had a great reputation for its beautiful scenery. When she was walking around Yuzhou when she was young, she even ran there to take a look. However, that trip was not a smooth one. She was only 15 or 16 at the time and had a gorgeous appearance. Although she was extremely careful, she was still targeted by Yankai Villa in Huiro area. At that time, Yankai Villa's status in Yuzhou's world was lower than that of the Zhu family. It is said that Tai Yinglu was attached to the Yuzhou Kui family, and now it is considered a big family second only to the Tang family. Yan Hanli, the young master of Yankai Villa back then, was a rather lecherous person. After accidentally seeing her at a gathering in the Jianghu, he began to show his attentiveness to her. At that time, she was very arrogant and treated Yan Hanli without hypocrisy. When Yan Hanli learned that she had no background and was from South Vietnam, she became angry and became evil. Throughout her life, she had never suffered a loss except when she was tricked by Su Danking. She poisoned a large number of people in Yankai Villa, and also spread the word about Yan Hanli's bullying of women in the world. For a family of Jianghu, chivalrous reputation is everything. Doing this is tantamount to having a deadly feud with Yankai Villa. 10 years have passed, and it's hard to say whether Yankai Villa has forgotten this matter. Although Shentangyu is some distance away from Yankai Villa, it is within their territory after all, and it is very likely that they were discovered by informants in the past. Thinking of this, Zhongli Jiju hesitated and asked, "Why did he go to Shentangyu?" Li Lin smiled, shook his head and said, "I only asked about where I went, but I definitely don't know what I was doing." Zhongli Jiju thought about it. If he didn't even know who he was looking for, how could he possibly know what to do? She nodded and had no choice but to nod her head and say thanks. "Good work. That's what I do, girl, you don't need to thank me." Li Lin raised his hand and made a salute, then turned and left. Zhongli Jiju looked at the sky. Although it was a little late, it was better to catch up with Su Buling as soon as possible. He did not stay any longer, and left the room with the shopkeeper, and left Fanyang County on a big red horse. In another inn on the same street, Ningyu he finished washing seriously, poured hot water into the bucket, prepared it for Ning Qingyi, and then sat in the room, waiting for Ning Qingyi to come back. After just waiting for half an hour, he should have returned from buying a meal, but Ning Qingyi didn't make any movement. Confused, Ningyu he left the inn and went to Wang's shop at the market entrance. He found the proprietress and asked, "Aunt Wang, half an hour ago, did a girl come over to buy food?" She was wearing a white dress and she was very beautiful. The old woman who was busy in the shop wiped her hands with a towel when she heard this. took the food aside and sighed. I came here just now. I paid all the money. After waiting at the door for a while, I somehow snatched the horse and ran away. Are you a member of her family? Go and find it quickly. It's very chaotic outside now. Everyone is here. Have. Ning Yuhi was stunned. She was right in front of him. Even if King Yi had something urgent to leave, he couldn't leave without saying goodbye. Why did he run away suddenly? Aunt Wang, did she leave any message before she left? The old woman recalled it and shook her head. He ran away without saying a word, and couldn't come back even if he called. But when he left, he seemed to have muttered the words Li Hans Hung, which should be a person's name. What? Ning Yuhi was shocked, and his cheeks suddenly showed a bit of anxiety. No wonder she had to say goodbye so quickly. She must have met Li Hans Hung on the street. King Yi had been wandering around since she was a child. She hated her biological father for abandoning his wife and daughter, so he naturally chased after him after he found his whereabouts. Li Hans Hung is the master of Eagle Tower, and his martial arts skills are unpredictable. King Yi is no match at all. Ning Yuhi was anxious and turned around to catch up, but he had already walked for an hour. The world was so big that he didn't know which direction he was running, so it was difficult to catch up. Ning Yuhi stood on the street and thought about it for a while. After all, Li Hans Hung was King Yi's biological father. Tiger poison will not eat its children. Moreover, Li Hans Hung founded Dainglu and killed the wolf guards to go against the court. It was obviously to avenge his wife's death. It was impossible to do anything to King Yi. How about it? And even if King Yi catches up and takes action against Li Han, he probably won't be able to touch his clothes. Thinking about it this way, King Yi was actually quite safe, and Ning Yuhi relaxed a little. However, King Yi hated Li Hans Hung so much that he must be very excited. He had to find him back as soon as possible. Ning Yuhi knew that Zulu and Li Hans Hung were in the same group. This time, he probably came to Yuzhu with Zulu to deal with the Tang family. If he wanted to find King Yi's whereabouts, he had to go to the Tang family and wait for Zulu. He would definitely meet him then. After analyzing for a while, Ning Yuhi made up his mind, took the horse from the inn, left the county city overnight, and continued to chase northward. On the side of the market, Zulu stood with his hands behind his back, stood at the window and watched Ning Yuhi fly away, with some doubts in his eyes. Lu Hongxiu stood in front of him and understood the meaning of Ning Yuhi's appearance in Yuzhu. She said, "Ning Yuhi is from the Tang family. She came here now. I'm afraid she learned from somewhere that you came to Yuzhu to seek revenge. Although Tang Jiao and others have a mortal feud with Ning Yuhi, she is a member of the Tang family after all. I guess she came to persuade you not to kill innocent people." Zulu was silent for a moment and said calmly, "All the male members of the Zhu family are innocent. Who cares? I know my limits. Tang Jiao's line must be killed, and the others will depend on the situation." Lu Hongxiu nodded and thought for a while. "My cousin seems to have come to Yuzhu too. His purpose is unknown. I hope we don't fight." "We can't fight. My daughter is in his hands." "Okay. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Prince is Very Fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 489. After crossing the Longfeng River, Su Buling stopped at Huangqiao Town in Yuyang County and entered the sphere of influence of the Tang family in Yuzhu. Huangqiao Town is the transportation hub of Yuzhu. Whether going to Tangjiazhuang or Bodhi Island in western Liaoning, you have to pass through here. When you reach this place, you have entered the core area of Yuzhu. The number of people in the rivers and lakes has increased sharply, and knights carrying swords can be seen everywhere, showing a prosperity that is completely different from the misty Jiangnan. Zhou Zhan, who met on the boat, seemed to have been in Yuzhou for a long time and was very familiar with the roads. He took Su Buling to the Yuela Inn in Huangqiao town. The owner of the inn was a news dealer in Yuyang, with many eyes and ears. Su Buling asked about the whereabouts of Ning Yuhe, and the result he got was naturally that he had not come yet. He also asked about the news of Tang Xiao, Zulu, and others. However, Su Buling did not reveal his identity, and the Tang family was rooted in the north of Yuyang County. The shopkeeper obviously did not dare to say it, but just asked him to ask somewhere else. After traveling back and forth, Su Buling had learned a little about the rules of the martial arts world. He did not torture him like he did to the fourth master Chen in Chang'an. He just stayed in Huangqiao town, patiently waiting for Ning Yuhe's arrival, and inquired about the movements of the Tang family. After the ranger Zhou Zhan arrived in Huangqiao town, he did not show his courtesy to make friends. After leading the way, he set off to continue looking for Sidu Yuejin's whereabouts. At first, Su Buling suspected that Zhou Zhan had some relationship with Zhou Qingkaiu, the national teacher of Northern Qi, and deliberately took the opportunity to get close to him, but after seeing Zhou Zhan leave so straightforwardly, he just thought it was a chance encounter in the martial arts world. It was a snowy winter day. A brazier was burning in Yuela Inn. A dozen of Jianghu people from all over the country sat together to warm themselves by the fire, chatting about the recent events. I heard that the black impermanence of the Tianzi camp came to Yuzhou. I wonder who they are here to catch this time. Here in Yuzhou, the Tang family is well known to the heavens and the earth. All the heroes who dare to walk around here have been captured by the Tang family to receive rewards. There are no heroes and fierce bandits. Don't say this nonsense. If the Tang family hears it, they will die without knowing how they died. Zhu Manzi, who was eavesdropping on the table, showed some contempt in his eyes when he heard this, and snorted imperceptibly. Su Buling sat between the two girls and raised his hand to make tea. It was not surprising that he said this to the Jianghu people. How the Yuzhou Tang family started was known to everyone in the Jianghu. Originally a second-rate family in Yuzhou, a genius emerged from the ancestor of the family. After observing the swordsmanship of the Cao and Lu families, he realized a set of swordsmanship, which is now the Tang family sword. It must be said that the Tang family sword is still very good. The Cao family sword focuses on speed, the Zhu family sword focuses on stability, and the Lu family sword focuses on cunning. Although the Tang family became famous the latest, they have brought the words speed and cunning to the extreme. The reputation of the sword has a sharp edge, but no shadow can show its level. It is precisely because of this set of self-contained swordsmanship that the Yuzhou Tang family has become a first-class family in the world, second only to the Zhu family. If it were just this, the Tang family would be regarded as having accumulated a lot of experience and should be respected by the people in the world, but the problem of the Tang family is: the sword is good, but the people are not. 10 years ago, when the Iron Eagle was hunting the deer, the whole Jianghu either fought desperately or protected themselves. Only the Tang family was different. They sold out their friends for fame and got in touch with the imperial court. They also took the lead in ambushing and killing the respected old swordsman Zhu Zhoushan in Yuzhou. They did all the things that only the scum of the Jianghu could do. They also explained to the outside world that they were serving the country to cover up their treacherous behavior. The Tang family really served the country, and they worked hard. They sent their children to join the army and help the detective department, which earned them a status that no one dared to mess with today. But anyone with a discerning eye knew that the Tang family was just a lapdog under the feet of the emperor. The meaning of their existence might be the example set by the imperial court for the Jianghu people. As long as they listened to the imperial court honestly, they could have whatever they wanted. But the meaning of Jianghu is a social environment that is not bound by laws. If they listened to the imperial court honestly, what kind of Jianghu is it? From the day the Tang family joined the imperial court, they were no longer considered Jianghu people. They could only be said to be the mouthpiece of the imperial court. The Tang family may also know that they can't survive in the underworld. In recent years, they have been moving around in the court, letting their children take important positions in the army, hoping to transform into a family of generals. No one knows the inside story of a family of generals better than Su Buling. The Dayu army has clear factions, just like the former Guanzhong Iron Cavalry, which includes the Lu family army, the Han family army, the Guo family army, etc. The main positions are all controlled by the children of generals, and the soldiers only listen to the orders of their own generals. Others can't be transferred at all. The Tang family has never fought a war, and their ancestors have never produced famous generals or gods of war. There are no soldiers available under their command, so how can they be called a family of generals? Su Buling thought so, and when he was distracted, the sound of horse hooves rang out on the street outside the inn. In a blink of an eye, a black horse passed through the snow, and on its back sat a woman wearing a veil. She was graceful and elegant, holding a long sword in her hand. Even though her face was covered by the veil, Su Buling still recognized who she was from her waist and hips. Dunning. Zhu Manzi, who was lying on the table, glanced at her with her peripheral vision, and then showed a little surprise. She sat up and half leaned out of the window to wave. Ningyu he rode to Huangkou town at full speed overnight. Just as he was about to come to Yuela Inn to inquire about the news, he looked up and saw 2 men and 1 woman sitting at the window of the inn, and was slightly stunned. Ling Seeing Su Buling turn around, Ningyu he didn't know what he was thinking, and turned his horse's head and wanted to run away. This look was like a wife who went out to do things on her own initiative and was caught by her man, and was afraid of being punished. Daning. Manzi's call came from behind again. Ningyu he ran for 2 steps on horseback, then realized what he was doing and stopped quickly, wanting to turn around and say hello. But before she turned around, she noticed something sinking behind her. Someone was sitting behind her, and he raised his hand and pinched her buttocks. "You're still running? Why are you hiding from me?" The man's familiar voice came, and the hot breath blew against his ears. Ningyu he shivered involuntarily, with a nervous look in his eyes, and explained anxiously. "Ling I didn't run away, I heard something. I'm going back to Yuzhu to have a look. You will leave for Suzhou immediately. I don't want to delay your wedding, so I went out secretly. I didn't mean to." Her words are cowardly, which fully reflects the appearance of a young daughter-in-law who has done something wrong. Su Buling was a little annoyed at first and wanted to give his master a lesson. But seeing this weak look, he felt a little reluctant to let go. He squeezed Ningyu's buttocks again and said in a cold voice, "Master, do you still think of yourself as an outsider? Can I feel relieved when you sneak out? Let's discuss anything in the future together. Don't make your own decisions." Ningyu he was worried that it would delay Su Buling's marriage, so he didn't say hello and go out, but it was definitely wrong to do so. Seeing Su Buling following him, she actually felt quite warm in her heart. She did not blame her disciple for his actions, but said softly, "I understand, if you follow me, what will happen to Xiaoqi and the others? They came over by boat and by sea. It will probably take some time to get to Binzhou. Let's deal with the Tang family's affairs first, and then we have to go to Bodhi Island." After Su Buling finished speaking, he took the reins from Ningyu he and looked at the street. "Master, where did King Yi go?" Ningyu he sat in front of Su Buling, looking a little confused. King Yi met Li Hanzhong and ran to chase him. Li Hanzhong is King Yi's biological father, so there should be nothing wrong. We can just wait here. Su Buling frowned slightly when he heard this. Zhu Liu's appearance must have been a cover to attract the attention of all parties, so as not to discover the unusual movements on Bodhi Island. Li Hanzhong is the owner of Daying Building, so it is impossible to follow him to the Tang family. I am afraid he has already gone to Bodhi Island. But as Ning Yu said, it shouldn't be a problem for Ning Qingyi to run after Li Hansheng. Su Buling had met Li Hansheng once, and could tell that Li Hansheng was not a psychopath, but that he had a gloomy temperament because of a blood feud. Without Ning Qingyi, he was more likely to be faceless than cold-blooded. Thinking of this, Su Buling didn't say much, got off his horse, took the reins and came to Yuela Inn. When Zhu Manzi saw Ning Yu, whom he had the best relationship with, his little face was full of joy. He ran over and pulled Ning Yu's sleeve, chirping. "Ning, you are so unloyal. You didn't inform me about such a big thing like coming to Yuzhu, which made Mr. Su and I come all the way to look for you. Mr. Su and I don't know the way, so we can't find you. Thank you for your hard work, huh? Where is Xiaoning?" Ning Yu's expression was a little reserved, and he responded casually, then called the waiter to prepare a room. "It's just that Zhu Manzi and Ning Yu have been traveling together for half a year, and they have always been sleeping in the same bed. At this time, they naturally waved. What kind of room are you opening? Let's sleep together tonight. I have a lot to say to you. That dead girl Nightingale is as boring as a gourd. She fell asleep when she lay down and couldn't even wake her up." Nightingale said lightly, "What you said is boring, I just don't want to hear it. Hey dash." During the commotion, several people went upstairs. Although Ning Yu looked weird and tried his best to find an excuse to stay in a room alone, he was stopped by the enthusiastic Xiao Manzi and was forcefully pulled into the room. The Prince is Very Fierce. Author, Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 490. The cold wind rolled up the wine flags of the inn, and it was a snowy night in Huangqiao town. Outside the window was the unrestrained laughter of the Gulan wine house, and if one could not hear clearly, one could even hear the sound of heart-to-heart fighting in a brothel not far away. I didn't feel sleepy to begin with, and now I couldn't sleep even more. Su Buling lay on the bed holding the back of his head, analyzing the current situation. Although he really wanted to know what Li Hansheng was looking for, he didn't necessarily have to rush there himself. When Li Hansheng got it, he could just ask his father-in-law Zulu. In order to attract attention, Zulu had leaked the news from the dark, and all forces must have noticed it. The Tang family will not sit still and wait for death. The wolf guard who suddenly came over may have come for this matter. In order to ensure that nothing happens to Manzi's father, he can only go to the Tang family first. After settling the matter with the Tang family, he can then go to Pegasus to Bodhi Island in Liaoxi County. In fact, these things have been thought about a long time ago, and again, the results are similar. Su Buring sighed softly, turned over and tried to change into a more comfortable position, then suppressed Nightingale who was curled up in his arms for warmth. Nightingale has a thin body, so she naturally doesn't bear the cold. She always sleeps with her face covered in the quilt. Realizing that she was being suppressed by her young master, Nightingale let out a muffled whine. She opened her eyes and couldn't see anything. She could only turn her head slightly. "Sir, you are so heavy." "Well." Su Buring turned over again, lying on his side on the pillow, looking at the little girl wearing only a belly band under the quilt, feeling a little uneasy. Nightingale's face was full of seriousness. She lowered her head and meowed, "Master, do you miss Sister Xiang? Sleep well, you know better." Su Buring gave a gentle scolding, stood up, put on his robe, and walked out of the room. The nightingale blinked its big eyes and suddenly moved to the inside. She put her ears against the wall and listened carefully. On a quiet winter night, all the guests in the inn had gone to sleep, leaving only a brazier burning in the hall. The waiter and the shopkeeper were sitting next to the brazier, warming wine and chatting. Su Buling silently walked outside the next room and listened carefully. 2 steady breathing sounds were faintly heard, and he must have fallen asleep. Squeak. The door opens and closes. Su Buling quietly entered the wing and closed the door. The furnishings in the guest room of the inn are very simple. Apart from a table, a bench, a bed, and a screen, there is nothing else. Manzi and Ning Yuhi's swords were placed on the small table by the window, and the curtain hat was also placed on it. There were 2 skirts placed on the stool beside the bed, neatly folded. Su Buling glanced at it and saw that Manzi's clothes were all there, but Ning Yuhi only took off his outer skirt. It seemed that he was afraid that Xiao Gongsha would be discovered, so he covered it tightly. After entering the room, there were only 2 gentle breathing sounds, and there was silence behind the curtain, as if Manzi was the only one left sleeping. With a slight smile, Su Buling walked forward softly, raised his hand and opened a corner of the curtain. Zhu Manzi was sleeping inside, covered tightly by the quilt, with his round little face exposed. The long eyelashes trembled slightly, as if she was having a very exciting dream, and there was a sweet smile on the corner of her mouth. Ning Yu lay down obediently, with her hands on the quilt. Her bright black eyes had been opened, and her cheeks as bright as the silver moon were filled with a bit of fear. She pursed her lips, but did not dare to make a sound. He motioned to Manzi next to him with his eyes, urging Su Buling to get out quickly. Su Buletinling smiled playfully and lay down next to Ning Yuhi. He raised his hand to lift the quilt and squeeze in. Ning Yuhi's eyes were filled with panic and pleading, and he was about to burst into tears. He squeezed the corners of the quilt tightly and said in a voice as loud as a mosquito, "Your Majesty, please go out. I will accompany you to another place. Go, don't be here." Su Buling opened Ning Yuhi's fingers, lifted up the quilt to cover her body, and leaned close to her ear. "Master, Manzi is sleeping deeply. You won't wake up if you don't move around. If you don't obey, Manzi will wake up later." Ji woke up. "It's hard for you to explain." "You." Ning Yuhi's face turned red, but he didn't dare to make any big moves. He secretly glanced at Manzi, who was close at hand, and pushed Su Buling out. "Master, turn around and face me." I don't. Then I'll come by myself. If I wake up Manzi." Ning Yuhi's heart nearly jumped out of her chest, and she couldn't drive Su Buling away. With no choice, she could only turn around slowly and lean into Su Buling's arms, facing her face, with a look of embarrassment on her face. Shy and anxious, "Goodbye, can I go out with you, anywhere, not here? It's late at night, how cold it is when you go out." Su Buling raised his arms and put his arms around Ning Yuhi, his cheek pressed against his ear, and his hands groped in the quilt. Ning Yuhi's eyes were watery, but he didn't dare to move. He squeezed Su Buling's hand and pushed it a few times, but it had no effect. He could only turn to hold his mouth to cover up his slightly rapid breathing. "Awkward, I can't find the place." "Woo." Ning Yuhi frowned slightly, almost biting his lip, and resisted moving. Su Buling breathed a sigh of relief, hugged Ning Yuhi, lay on his side comfortably, and said softly, "Master, why have you been here these past few days? King Yi didn't notice that your palace guard sand was gone." Ning Yuhi's body was obviously trembling slightly. He was not thinking about chatting with Su Buling. He just closed his eyes and didn't make a sound. I don't know how long it took, but the town became completely silent, leaving only the whistling sound of the cold wind. There were beads of sweat on Ning Yu's forehead, her breath was like blue, and she weakly pushed Su Buletinling with her elbow. "Okay, go back quickly." Su Buling took a few breaths, let go of Ning Yuhi, and sat up. Ning Yuhi quickly closed his coat and glanced at the sleeping Manzi. He was secretly relieved when he saw that Manzi was still fast asleep with his eyes closed and was not woken up. Su Buling had no intention of leaving, and threw the skirt on the master. "Let's go, let me draw a picture for you." When Ning Yuhi heard this, she immediately became angry. Just now she had said that she would go out and paint, and then, now that things are like this, what else is there to draw? Ning Yuhi was a little sulky, turned his back to Su Buling, and whispered, "No more painting, you go. Then I'll continue." Ning Yuhi suddenly became anxious. He had no choice but to drag his weak body up and slowly put on his clothes. Su Buling took Ning Yuhi out of the room, fetched brushes and paints from the room, then jumped out of the inn window and came to a relatively secluded roof. Arriving at a deserted place, Ning Yuhi finally dared to speak. With shame and annoyance in his eyes, he raised his hand and patted Su Buling on the shoulder. "Ling how could you do this? Just now Manzi was beside me, and I even told you that I was going out with you." Su Buling had done everything, so naturally he felt confident. He sat down on the snow on the roof, took out his paintbrush and said with a smile, "Okay, master, come here quickly. When the weather gets cold, the paint will freeze and you won't be able to paint." Ning Yuhi clenched his hands tightly and stared at Su Buling with his watery eyes for a moment. In the end, he was helpless and sat down slowly beside him, looking in the direction of the north in silence. Su Buling pushed Ning Yuhi on the shoulder, then lifted up her skirt and began to outline the pattern with a pen. Seeing Ning Yuhi looking north without speaking, he asked, "Master, what are you thinking about?" Ning Yuhi lay on the snow, folded his hands on his waist, and pursed his lips in silence. "The Tang family is just 100 miles away to the north. There are several shops in the town that belong to the Tang family. I used to go there when I was a child. I hung out here and lived in the Yuela Inn for a while. Because my surname was Tang, no one dared to bully me. In fact, the Tang family was not all bad people. The bad ones were Tang Jiao and his brothers, who made the Tang family into in this state. My mother is also dead. I never thought she would come back." The words were intermittent, as if they were reminiscing, and they seemed to be expressing their true feelings. Su Buling listened quietly, sketched the pattern at leisure, and comforted softly, "Now that I have come to Yuzhu, it is impossible for Tang Jiao to live past the new year. I will avenge master, and you can just be my little wife." Mentioning this, Ning Yuhi sighed quietly, shook his head and said, "You can't kill Tang Jiao. Tang Jiao has a very good relationship with the court. You are the prince of the vassal, so you should stand by him. Zulu Go's killing him is just revenge for the Jianghu people, and the court has nothing to do. If you kill him, you will be the prince of the feudal lord who killed the court officials, and the emperor will definitely launch an army to hold him accountable." Su Buletinling paused for a moment, did not deny this, and thought for a moment, "There should be no problem with assassination. I have not appeared in public. Even if the court suspects me, it will not dare to act recklessly without evidence. Besides, Tang Jiao is just a subordinate of the emperor. Dog, even if I was poked out and I could find any excuse to offend me, the Holy Spirit would not make me pay for my life. At most, he would scold me." Ning Yuhi thought for a moment, turned his head, looked at the handsome face close at hand, and said in a soft voice, "Your Majesty, I don't want you to do anything for me. The only thing I have to do now is revenge. Once the revenge is avenged, it will be fine. When the time comes, you can take me back to the palace, whether as a concubine or a maid. I don't say anything, just give you a child honestly, and live like this for the rest of your life. But if you get into trouble for me, even if you get revenge, I won't be able to feel at ease." Su Buring looked a little helpless. After drawing the pattern, he put away the brush, held his hand against the snow, and looked down at Ning Yuhi's cheek. "You are my master, how can I let you be a concubine with no status?" The condescending look can easily remind people of strange things. Ning Yuhi turned his eyes away slightly and looked at the lights in the distance. "I almost became a queen back then. I definitely couldn't marry you publicly. If the emperor knew about it, he would be so angry that he would die. If not a concubine and a maid, what else could I be?" Su Buling said seriously, "Be a master. As the saying goes, once a teacher, always a daughter-in-law. Ning Yuhi obviously didn't like the joke very much, so he gave Su Buling a gentle push. Stop talking nonsense. The master-disciple status is bigger than heaven. How can you be your master now that you are like this? Either you don't touch me in the future, I will forget about it, and an Xin will be your master. Su Buling shook his head, looking like there was no room for discussion. Ning Yuhi pursed her lips, and had nothing to say except a resigned sigh. Who made her lose her mind and take the initiative to push her apprentice? Wait a moment, there should be another chapter.